I will start with introducing our first seminar speaker for the spring semester. Very pleased to introduce Dr. Ray Smith. So Ray is a native of Georgia, and he received his undergraduate degree from Asbury University in Kentucky. And then after teaching high school biology for 2 years, he entered into graduate school in agronomy and plant breeding at the University of Georgia. And then from 1991 to 2001, he held a research, teaching, and extension position at the University of Manitoba with a focus on alfalfa and native grass breeding, seed production, and forage management. He was a forage extension specialist at Virginia Tech from 2001 to 2004, and he's now a professor and extension specialist at the University of Kentucky. And he is the current chair of the continuing committee for the International Grassland Congress and past president of the American Forage and Grassland Council. He's published 55 articles in refereed journals, presented 175 papers at professional conferences, written over 140 extension publications, and given over 700 extension presentations. Ray has been the advisor of 17 master's students, 5 PhDs, 5 postdocs, and 27 senior research students. And his current extension activities include working closely with county agents and producers, conducting applied forage research for Kentucky and the transition zone, helping organize state, regional, national, and international forage conferences, and writing applied agricultural publications. His current research projects include evaluating forage varieties for grazing tolerance and yield, developing forage production systems for beef and dairy, and developing and comparing pasture evaluation methods. And he's just returning back from sabbatical, so we're excited to hear about what he's been up to and see some photos from Montana.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks everyone for joining. Wish we were in person, but that will happen one day. So I want to highlight several things from sabbatical. You see there in the title, I want to highlight work that I did on sabbatical with the International Grassland Congress. So I entitled that The History and the Future of the IGC, and a few photos from Montana because that's where I spent sabbatical. For those of you not as familiar with how sabbatical works, it's given you have the opportunity every 7 years at most universities. And the whole point of a sabbatical is for professional development, to learn new research techniques, maybe to do writing, in essence, to do things that would help you in your professional development. Obviously a time of renewal, and also to help the department, help the university by what you're going to learn and bring back. And so hopefully you'll get a little bit of that as we go through. And I've got 2 main parts of the presentation. One is talking about the work with the International Grassland Congress. The second part is more just kind of a photo collage of things that we saw and did in Montana. And if you stay to the end, I'll tell you a story about a dark, rainy night, a trail that disappeared, the local search and rescue, and lessons learned from that. So here's my wife, Stephanie. I'll show you more pictures as we went on, but I want to make sure I introduced you because it was wonderful that we were there together in Montana for about 3.5 months of the 6-month sabbatical last fall. First, want to give thank yous because I couldn't have gone on sabbatical if people weren't willing to cover for things here. I want to thank you to the Forage Extension Group for holding down the fort while I was away. I want to thank Krista, Echo, and Riley for continuing our horse pasture evaluation program with limited staff and with COVID restrictions. I want to especially thank Jimmy and Chris for handling all the state's forage extension activities and calls. Jean and Gabriel for keeping all the field work going. Jordan Bush and Kelly Mercer, they're Chris's grad students, but we do a lot of teamwork together in the forage group. So thank them for all their work. Andy Bailey took over as the interim extension coordinator while I was gone. Abby continued her great work with managing the review process for extension publications, and I could go on, but just a few thank yous there for people that I work directly with. So the International Grassland Congress, just a little bit of background. First of all, if you don't know, grasslands cover about 27% of the world's land area, 70% of agricultural land. They form an important foundation for agriculture and for livestock husbandry and contribute to the livelihoods of more than 800 million people. The International Grassland Congress, or IGC, as you may hear me referring to it, began as a meeting of a small group of forage researchers in Europe in 1927. It's now expanded into a gathering held every 3 to 5 years with over 1,000 delegates from 80 plus countries who represent research, extension, and primary production. My first International Grassland Congress was in New Zealand in 1993. I was much more involved in the one in 97, there in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I was teaching at the University of Manitoba and helped a fair bit with the tours, with the local tours with that meeting. In 2013, I was elected to be on the board of the International Grassland Congress. And then at the meeting that was held in India in 2015, I was asked to be the chair of the continuing committee. You get a little bit of feel as I go through for some of the responsibilities of the continuing committee and of the chair. But the main point is to make sure that these every several year grassland congresses happen, that locations are chosen, and that all the details that need to happen in between take place. I'll give you a few examples of that in just a second. Here's the geographical regions. There's 11 different regions of the world. There's a representative from each region. I want to thank Jordan Bush for updating this map. Jordan also made an updated list of all the countries within each region because obviously that has changed over time. So the primary objectives for my sabbatical were to liaise with the continuing committee, to clarify the roles of chair and committee members. And these were, when I wrote my proposal for sabbatical to the University of Kentucky, these were the objectives that I had. Number 2, work with co-authors to complete and publish the IGC history. Publish all the IGC proceedings online was another goal. Develop or start to develop an IGC archives. Revise the IGC website. Update the IGC Constitution. And Roger, I know you're on from the UK, and I'm not sure if we need to update it, but that's something to look into if there's any updates needed. Accomplish resolutions from past Congresses. Work with Kenya on the 2020-2021 Congress. You see 2 dates there because COVID postponed it from 2020 to October 2021. Help lay the groundwork for the 2023 International Grassland Congress and the 2027 Congress, which will be the 100th anniversary of the International Grassland Congress. And to work to help develop detailed planning guidelines for future IGC Congresses. Now, my sabbatical, I've already given away that I was in Montana, but it was to be in Ireland. In fact, they had lined up for me to be stay in on a house at the Moore Park Research Station, and that's what where Steph and I were going to be during the week, and then we were going to be hiking the Cliffs of Moore and other places during the weekends, but COVID nixed that plan. But we really felt like this was a good time for sabbatical. There were good people that could cover for me. And even though with all the COVID uncertainties, we said, what are other options? That led us to Libby, Montana. We drove out there, so pretty good drive out, beautiful scenery along the way. And if you're not familiar with Libby, it's quite a small town. Libby is about 20 miles from the border with Idaho, so northwestern Montana, about 40 miles from Canada. Here's the border with Canada. You'll hear me refer later in the presentation to Lake Koocanusa, which is partly in the US, partly in Canada. You'll hear me talk about the Kootenai River. You'll hear me talk about the Cabinet Mountain Range. So if you want to get a perspective where those things are as we move through. So what happened is, and I can even remember the details of the conversation, but I was talking to my sister and brother-in-law that run a training center there in Libby, or just outside of Libby. And I mentioned to them about sabbatical and Ireland not working out, and that most of my work would be on the computer. So one thing led to another, and they invited Stephanie and I to come out and stay at the training center. This was our room up on the 3rd floor. And then Stephanie was able to help with the students that were at the training center. I was able to complete the sabbatical work, and we were in a beautiful location. And I did extra things like here, teaching my nephew some of the arboriculture skills that I've learned over the years. So brother-in-law Jeff, my sister Andrea, Stephanie and I we went on a picnic to a local area where there was a nice little creek. So these are the students that were at the training center when we were there, from a number of states. John here in the back from Canada. You're seeing us actually eating a meal in mid-October, Canadian Thanksgiving. There were a lot of things that I did every day. I mean, I was continuing to keep up with emails and some of the funded projects at University of Kentucky, et cetera. But my primary goal was to make sure that every day I was doing something on the International Grassland Congress and or something with journal publications. That wasn't a formal part of my sabbatical proposal, but we all know how hard it is to get referee journal publications written and submitted and through the process. And that worked well, even though I didn't have any senior author publications. There was 6 publications that either were published, accepted, or submitted during that process with former students and colleagues. My turnaround time was a few days rather than a few weeks, as it normally is, reviewing publications, and continue to work with Kelly Mercer, Katie Payne, a former student. Kelly's a current PhD student, on publications from their dissertations. I'm putting this up there. This is the seed heads of blue grama. Jimmy Henning took this beautiful close-up picture in the greenhouse. This is reminding me that the publication I'm proudest of that we got finished during this time was with a former graduate student, Glenn Friesen. We published a paper from his thesis that was from research 20 years ago. One of those things that I'd been meaning to get to Manhattan, and it's nice to have that out. It was characterizing genetically diverse blue grama seed sources. So let me go through not all of these objectives, but I'm going to just highlight things from several of the objectives and the accomplishments with that. Now, number 2 was to work with the co-authors to complete and publish the International Grassland Congress history. So this is the cover for the printed version, actually cover for the PDF version as well of the IGC history. This came about as an idea a number of years ago. I think, Gary, you and I probably talked about it first. You recruited Vivian Allen to be involved, and then Vivian recruited Roger Wilkins. Roger's on the call as well from England. Vivian and Roger really were the main authors, the main finders of all the detailed contents for the 400 pages that make up this history. Gary and I definitely gave them a lot of support and encouragement and review through this whole process. I won't go through all the pages of the history, but let me just give you a couple of highlights. We just sent this to the publisher to see a first proof copy. We'll get more hard copies, but mainly to be available as a PDF, hopefully within the next month or 2. So this history provides not only an overview of the IGC Congress over the last 93 years, but what's I think most special is it highlights the people, the events, the changes in grassland agriculture around the world during this period. I'm just amazed at the things that Vivian and Roger and people that they work with were able to come up with. For example, photographs from, well, let me just go to the next page. And here's from a poster presentation I gave on the history from the second IGC Congress in Sweden. And I can go on and on about all the things that were that came up and publications and translations from the first two congresses that were in German. Just a interesting tidbit: the 8th IGC, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, was actually the president of that Congress. So let me just give you a couple of highlights, and this is from Words of Wisdom from Voices of the Past. I feel like I'm not doing the history, I'm giving it a disservice, but there's so much rich content going over all the years of the IGC and all the congresses and all the things that happened in grassland agriculture during that time. But let me just represent that by things that were said at several of the different congresses. And partly I'm saying this to emphasize the value of congresses like this, specifically the value of the International Grassland Congress. At the 7th Congress, Levy from New Zealand, back in 1956, said, "Grasslands of the world stand twixt a world of plenty and a world of famine, between a land surface of green oasis and a land of desert, between surface soil stability and accelerated erosion. Grasslands are important in gathering to share information and to work with colleagues from around the world is essential to maintain grasslands." The 17th Congress in 1993 that was in New Zealand, Ray Brougham said, "It's up to you, the speakers and delegates, to debate the issues and provide the world with your recommendations and conclusions. Make them good and meaningful, because perhaps the world has not got much time left to ensure the sustainability of grasslands." In essence, the delegates at these congresses are the people that need to be making the differences and have the potential to make the differences. If we're silent, then that not much time left to ensure the sustainability will be true. There was a joint Congress of the International Rangeland Congress and the International Grassland Congress in China in 2008. Jim O'Rourke, Gavin Sheath from New Zealand, Vivian Allen gave the opening presentation, and they mentioned that from the earliest of beginnings, our global grazing lands have been essential to human survival. Our relationship with grazing lands has been increasingly exploitive, but there is now a slow reawakening of our interdependence with the many services provided by grazing lands. I also just want to give an acknowledgement to, or there's many people to acknowledge, but particularly my research analyst, Krista Lay, who helped a lot in the publication and layout process of this history. Okay, the next priority or next objective that I want to highlight is getting the IGC proceedings online. So up till about a year ago, or even in the last 6 months, I would get 2 or 3 calls a year from someone that couldn't find the proceedings in a library or couldn't find an article. And they would say, for example, here, the 1952 Congress in Pennsylvania, they would say, "Could you possibly get me a copy of that article by so-and-so?" And I would go and get the book, or get Susan, the secretary over here, to get that and scan it and send it to them. Now, we have had about the last 5 Congresses online, the proceedings from those Congresses, but they were in essence large PDF files. They were somewhat searchable depending on which Congress it was from, but it was hard to get access to that information. So I'm really excited about the initiative and working with Adrian Ho with UK Knowledge at the, and I say UK, Roger, obviously we're saying University of Kentucky, not United Kingdom, but working with Adrian here at the libraries at the University of Kentucky. And what I want to highlight is what Adrian has done, and our goal is to get all the proceedings going back to 1927 that would be online and completely searchable. So let me just give you an example. If I Google, and I did this morning, grassland policy issues, the first thing that pops up is this article from the International Grassland Congress proceedings. This was a paper that I gave. I actually, a few weeks ago, just happened upon the fact that I could get to my paper this way. So this is on the UK Knowledge site, and the whole proceedings is there. But I Googled that, I click on it, I get to the individual paper. I can download the paper. I can also look at the number of downloads since that has been online. So there's been 163 downloads of this paper in a little bit over the last year. I can look at the metrics and find out where those downloads are from. So in essence, our goal, we haven't the last 3 proceedings, but our goal is that every paper in the proceedings of the International Grassland Congress is going to be completely available, completely searchable. It will get that information out to the world audience. Another objective was to start the development of a International Grassland Congress archives. And we have an archives group at the University of Kentucky. I want to definitely highlight Ruth Bryan, the director of archives. Ruth and I have talked on the phone monthly over the last number of months about all the details that go into developing archives. I just kind of thought, well, you just take a box of stuff and here you go. But there's obviously a lot more to it than that. Ruth may even be on the presentation today. So Ruth has kind of led me through the process of getting the online information up or the electronic information up, getting together, starting the process of collecting other material. Vivian has a big box of old files and photos that we're going to pick up in coming months. So I'm really excited to finally have an archive of all the material, going back as far as we can, so that future continuing committees, future chairs of continuing committees will have access, and actually future researchers will have access to the history, not just the proceedings, not just the presentations, but everything that has gone on with the International Grassland Congress. I dug up out of the storage room in the bottom of Ag North the file from the address file for the 1981 International Grassland Congress that was held in Lexington, Kentucky. Gary, you were at that Congress, as were a number of other people. I just pulled up one of the receipts there. Kenneth Clark was the person that I took his place at the University of Manitoba in 1991. In fact, it was fun just looking back over who all attended that Congress. There's even carbon copy receipts that still work, or kind of work, but probably we don't need those anymore. A really neat thing is the photography group, Matt Barton and others over in Ag Communication. I think, Gary, you mentioned to me that they had taken a lot of pictures at that 81 Congress. And so I made a contact over there, and they had just recently collected together their photographs. Obviously, you can see negatives when we're talking 81, going back to 1970. They had these cataloged. And so they've sent me the negatives. We're going to take certain ones of these negatives and put into photographs. So these are photographs from that 1981 Congress. I haven't picked out specific people, but I'm looking forward to looking in more detail and looking, Gary, with you and others. So thank you, Ruth, for that work. And I forgot to mention a little anecdote with Ruth. She attended the 1981 Congress, but she was a young child, remembers roller skating around UK's campus because she attended with her family. Her dad, William Bryan, was an agronomy professor at the University of West Virginia. Next objective was to work with Kenya on the 21 Congress. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was scheduled to be in October 2020. COVID delayed that, so now it's in October 2021. And that is our second joint International Grassland, International Rangeland Congress. So covering all of the grazing lands worldwide with this meeting coming up the end of October 2021. This is a very big deal. The Kenyon Group have been excellent to work with, and they've done so much organization. It's been difficult in the last months with all the uncertainties due to COVID, but we're pushing ahead with this Congress. And I'll mention some more details in a second. But it will be held in Nairobi, or the main venue will be in Nairobi. I've got the sub-themes listed here. The overall theme is sustainable use of grassland, rangeland resources for improved livelihoods. If you Google IGC Kenya or IRC Kenya, you'll get to the website. You can get all of these details. I'm encouraging some of you to think about coming. There's tours that will happen, pre-Congress tours, number of the wildlife areas, mid-Congress tours. Here's an example of one of the mid-Congress tours to research stations and other locations there. There'll be 13 mid-Congress tours. Now, many of you may say, are you really going to be able to have an in-person meeting with COVID? We're working and been working over the last 3 to 4 months with the Kenyan Organizing Committee on a hybrid Congress, meaning all that can make it there in person will have in person. Those that can't make it will have a virtual meeting. That's the current plans. We'll be talking, have a major meeting with the organizing committee and higher ups in the government middle of February to kind of make some final decisions on this. Rebecca's probably listening. I won't be requesting formal permission to go to the Congress for a few months. Let's let things settle down, but hopefully I and others at University of Kentucky and around the US will be able to go, and around the world will be able to go, but we'll also wait and see. So one of the things the Kenyon Group was most disappointed in, if people are not able to come in person, is how are we going to do tours? And we want people to actually see Kenya, experience Kenya. So I talked to them about an example that I learned from the European Grassland Federation meeting that was in October in Finland. Now it wasn't, no one was in Finland except the organizers. It was to be in Finland in June. It was a virtual conference in October, but they did virtual tours. Several of us have done things like this, but I was really impressed at how they went about doing that. There were 181 participants at the time that I was on the virtual tour. During about a 3-hour block, one of the days of the meeting, you signed up, you got to the tour, you got to visit individual farms, individual research stations. They had filmed these back in the summer. Here's a farm from a couple there that talked about their operation, talked about what they did. And so it wasn't like being there, but it was the next best thing to experience a lot of that country, of agriculture in that country. Here's the couple there that we were able to visit their farm and talk with them. And so we're looking to do this same type of thing in Kenya, even if we do have many people come in person. For those that cannot, having virtual tours should be a good option and also a good legacy to have after the meeting. Yeah, another objective of Sabbatical was laying the groundwork for the 2023 and the 2027 Congress. The goal with the 2027 Congress is to have it back in Europe, 100th anniversary of the first one in Germany. And I've had some productive discussions with people about that potential. The 2023 Congress is going to be in the US. Be the third time that the meeting has been in the US. The American Forage and Grassland Council put in a bid for this Congress. And I'll be quite involved with that, as will many others. And encourage you to put this date on your calendar, May 14th to 20th, 2023. Now you may ask yourself, well, that's getting pretty close to the delayed Kenya conference. We talked about delaying this one further, but in conversations with Tina Bowling and her talking to the hotels and the convention center there in Covington, for us to get out of the contract that we have for those dates would be $365,000. And that's not really an option. So these two congresses will be closer together and we'll make the best of it. We just got online the call for presentations. Now you've got over a year to submit these presentations. And this has just been up recently. So I'll be sending this out, giving you more details on the opportunities here, particularly for those of us in Kentucky. Many of you will be asked to help with this Congress. Here's the first two themes. Again, if you type in international grasslands, don't put the word Kenya, just put international grasslands, you'll get to the main IGC website. You can see some of the links for the meeting in 2023. Tours will cover the US during the pre-Congress period. We'll also have mid-Congress tours in Kentucky and Ohio and Indiana. Okay, I could talk more and more about the International Grassland Congress. Definitely want to acknowledge the support of so many people, and definitely Vivian Allen, Roger Wilkins, and Gary Lacefield with the history. I don't feel like I can really claim much credit for that, but I've been very glad to be a part of that process. But let me tell you just about what being in Montana, just how that was. And I'm telling you because hopefully you'll like to see some nice pictures, but also if as you're thinking for the future, thinking of maybe bucket list things you'd like to do. Some of you may be thinking of sabbatical, not that you're going to Montana, but thinking about opportunities that might be created. And Tim Phillips asked about grasses. Here's a few grasses, Tim, up on top of a ridge overlooking the Cabinet Mountains. We drove out there, as I mentioned. We stopped along the way. Here's the Teddy Roosevelt National Park in the Badlands area of North Dakota. Took a hike there. My Stephanie and my kids, when they were younger, they would often be a little, I guess frustrated is the word, with me stopping every so often to take pictures along the roadside. But here are cattle grazing alfalfa as we move through Montana. And actually it was useful, this picture, because I'm updating working with the National Alfalfa Alliance to update the Grazing Alfalfa publication, Gary, that you wrote and others a number of years ago. And this is a photo that'll go into that. Beautiful countryside. This is just a picture out of our bedroom window at an Airbnb in middle of Montana. This is for Tom Keene here with an irrigated alfalfa field in Montana. Before we got to Libby, we stopped in Glacier National Park. Neither of us had ever been there, or Stephanie, I think maybe did as a child, but beautiful, beautiful sights. This is going up the road to the sun. Beautiful scenery. The only disadvantage was I was on the inside lane. Stephanie was on the outside, and this was built back in the 30s by the CCC. They don't have a lot of barrier for protection, so it's a little scary as you drive along and look over the edge. But 60 miles west of Glacier National Park is the area surrounding Libby. This is a picture of the Cabinet Mountain Range. I showed you in that earlier photo. Here's another view from another angle. This is looking from the south to the north. Another view, beautiful. I mean, everywhere you looked, it was beautiful. And I'm realizing that all the more now that we're not there, and just appreciating the experiences that we were able to have. One of Stephanie and I's goal, I kind of made sure that I got up at 6 every morning. That kind of fit in with the time zone back in the East because it was mountain time there. Worked until 1 o'clock lunchtime. Then sometimes worked in the afternoon. Sometimes we did outings, and our favorite outings were hiking. This is just a couple of miles. One of our favorite walks just along the roadway going out from the training center. This is about 3 miles from the training center. I'm walking up Sheldon Mountain. About 20 miles other side of the Cabinet Mountains is Ross Creek Cedars, an area of virgin western red cedar that had been fortunately left by the logging company. Amazing trees, not the size of redwoods, but still 200 feet tall, very large diameter, 500 years old. Amazing, a nice hike around that area. One of our favorite hikes that Stephanie and I had was up to a location called Lee Lake. In fact, just within about a 20-mile radius, 20 miles out of Libby in direction, there's about 150 hikes, are trails that the National Forest Service maintains Now, they don't maintain them that well. I'll explain that later. But one of our favorite ones was up to Lee Lake. Pretty rugged terrain. This trail was rated as moderate on the trail guides.
No, can't hear you.
It skirted up between a couple of mountains, but you got up between there and you got to this beautiful lake, about a 30-acre lake fed by glaciers there from the mountains. I can't describe how not neat it was going there, going to, like I say, we hiked about 4 to 5 miles every day. Whenever we could, we picked blueberries. Well, actually, they're called huckleberries out there. It's a little different species, but similar to the blueberries that we have. This was outside of Glacier National Park. Now, we were always aware, and people kept telling us to be aware because bears like huckleberries as well. This, fortunately, was a little bear that we saw right along the roadside, little black bear right along the roadside in Glacier. But there were signs most every place we come to a parking area, and they would talk about, this is grizzly bear habitat. Bears own this land, you're just the visitor, et cetera, et cetera. So we tried to be very careful. We didn't see a bear on our hikes, but we did see some signs of bears, and this was quite a fresh sign on one of our favorite hikes along the Kootenai River. Now, the recommendations on what you do if you see a bear are quite varied. This is out of a little manual on, educating you about bears. So grizzly bear can reach speeds of 30 to 35 miles an hour in a split second, cover 50 yards in less than 3 seconds. Never try to outrun a bear. It will only make matters worse. Okay, so that means don't run. So stand still, back up slowly, don't look them in the eye, over and over and over. And then a little bit later in that publication, it said some bears, mainly young ones, actually stalk humans. So if that happens, then defend yourself aggressively. If a bear is mauling you, then don't be quiet. Hit them, especially in their head, eyes, and nose. Now, I don't know what I would do if that was happening. Not too long before we left, just 30 miles from where we were, father and son were fairly severely injured in a grizzly attack. So it really brought home. So if you go to bear country, make sure you have bear spray. A couple of bits of advice with bear spray, though. One is when you're getting out of your vehicle to go picking huckleberries, and your wife is standing beside you, and you want to make sure your bear spray works, make sure you don't spray it into the wind. That kind of causes a bit of discomfort. Another bit of advice, if you're ever out on a cold, rainy evening and the safety comes off your bear spray and it sprays on you accidentally, you're very warm. Your skin is quite warm. You don't even need a jacket. And I won't tell you how I learned those two lessons. Okay, let me give you a fun thing that we had in Montana. I don't know, some of you may have done this, but we went to the International Chainsaw Carving Competition held every year in Libby. Libby is quite a big area for logging, particularly it was in former years. And it was pretty amazing what people made carved with chainsaws. People came from around the US, several internationally. Many of the international people weren't able to come because of COVID, but we were flabbergasted. They would give each carver, they had a competition. They gave them 90 minutes to make something out of a piece of wood like this. Not sure if I can show it here, but this is once you got there and they started 90 minutes. Let me see if I can get my volume on my phone. I don't think I'm going to get this going. Sounds like race cars taking off. This is the beginning of the chainsaw carving competition. Okay, this is one of the products from one of those sculptors made within 90 minutes. Here's another one. You see the piece of wood at the bottom here, just a straight piece of wood. He was able to dovetail another one in and made that beautiful eagle in 90 minutes. Here's a very expert carver with these sculptures. We actually bought this small little bear from him. So anyway, neat experience, neat things we did out there. My two nephews, Jonathan, 15, and William, who's 20, we were able to do a lot of things with them. Here I'm at above Lake Kukunusa, going rock climbing with them. And if you don't think an old man can't do adventuresome things, here I am figuring out the way to the top from where I'm at right now. And I was able to make it to the top there. Went deer hunting with Jonathan there. And deer hunting there is not like I've experienced in Kentucky or the East, where you go and sit someplace and wait. You hike there. Deer are very dispersed. So we got up at 5 in the morning, saw the sunrise, hiked up and down mountains, hiked 14 miles that day. Here's overlooking Libby from the top of Sheldon Mountain. I don't know if any of you have ever snagged salmon. I didn't say fished for salmon, because when they're migrating upstream, they're not really going after bait. But when they get to waterfalls here like Kootenai Falls, many of them are so tired that they don't make it. So they'll actually let you, with a big giant hook, snag the salmon and bring them out. And here's Jonathan and taking the photos, who was also involved with this. Interesting tidbit, the salmon have turned kind of red as they move upstream, as many of you may be familiar. If you're red-green colorblind and the water's green and the fish are red, it's a bit hard to see. I felt like a blind man there. Stephanie had to point out to me where the fish were 10 feet in front of me. We caught several, and we were good outdoorsmen. We not only made sure that we consumed the fish, John and I consumed the eggs as well. They were best mixed in the scrambled eggs. And my advice is you don't have to eat all of the eggs that you catch. Just a few will probably be enough. One of our favorite spots out there was Kootenai Falls along the Kootenai River. It's really more a series of rapids rather than just a single falls. It's kind of a series of rapids over about a mile. Notice on the far side some trails. I'll talk about those trails in just a few minutes. So there's also a swinging bridge across the Kootenai River. The roadway is up here at the top. The main rail line, that's actually what you would take if you were taking Amtrak across the northern US. And then here, the swinging bridge across the river. Here's an overview of that area with the falls that I showed you before at the top, the rapids coming down, the swinging bridge somewhere in between, hidden by those trees. Our favorite hike there was along the river. We called it the River Trail. In fact, the locals all called it the River Trail. It started right here at the end of this road, and you hiked along the river. This is an overlook kind of up above that trail. We saw a lot of wildlife while we were there. Now, before you got to the River Trail, the bighorn sheep, they were smart. It was very dry. There wasn't green grass on the mountainsides where they were supposed to be. So they loved staying in the yards, eating the irrigated Kentucky bluegrass and other grasses there in the yards. A couple of other photos from the River Trail. And what we liked about this trail was it was, we could hike 2.5 miles, and then we'd turn around and come back. So we could get a 4 to 5 mile hiking quite easily. Nice trail, fairly level, not nearly like the up and down to Lee Lake or the big hikes up and down the mountains I had with Jonathan. And then we went to the Libby Ranger District, and we found a trail map for what they called Bighorn Trail. It's actually the River Trail, as we called it, or as the locals called it. We called it Bighorn Trail because those bighorn sheep in the yards were supposed to be along this trail. And we were excited when we saw this because it said you could hike all the way from along the Kootenai River to Kootenai Falls. I just showed you those falls earlier. It also said that the difficulty of this trail was easy. 4.5 miles, easy trail. And we've been there a lot of times. All we had to do was walk a bit further. We'd get to Kootenai Falls. We'd cross that swinging bridge. We'd be in good shape. So one afternoon, Stefan and I, things had finished at the training center. It was about 5 o'clock. It got dark there about 7:45. The kind of pace that we were doing with our hiking, we knew we'd be down to Kootenai Falls about 7. So told my brother-in-law, please pick us up at the parking lot, 7:15. That'll give us some extra time. And off we went. Here's the rainbow photo that I showed at the beginning. You can see the trail coming along the rock slide here. We turned around at this point. The trail was fairly steep on the sides. The trail was not marked as far as blazes on the rocks, but fairly easy to find and see, and neat to see that rainbow. Trail got a little bit more windy, a little bit narrower as we continued. As I mentioned, there's 150 trails, Forest Service trails there. Then they're actually not well marked, as we found out several times. We continued along. We were excited when we got to the Kootenai Falls area. You see the rapids down below. We were hiking along the trail along that rock slide. So this is across the river, looking back at that trail. And you'll actually, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's not just the main trail in the middle here. There's other paths. And some things are the main trail, some things are mountain goat trails, our bighorn sheep trails. But we're plugging along. We've gotten to the rapids. We knew it was just a little bit further to the swinging bridge. We were in good shape. In fact, I think it was about 6:30 by this time. We'd hiked a little over 4 miles by then. Started getting a little bit narrower as we went along. The area was a little bit steeper. I wish I had some more photos when it got really steep, but we were getting pretty scared. And so let me just demonstrate kind of an example of what the trail got narrower and narrower, down to about 4 inches wide along these rock slides. Stephanie mentioned to me several times, you know, Ray, do you think we might be on one of those goat trails? And, you know, we never saw a path that went off. And I said, well, there's the rapids down below us. Pretty soon we were able to see the swinging bridge. It's got to be near here. Maybe the trail's not maintained. Maybe it washed out. So we continued forward, coming along this area. We're going along. There's about a 40-foot cliff down to the river and the rapids, and we were up along about 100 feet up. Gingerly working our way along the side. I sent a text to my brother-in-law to say we might be running a little bit late to that 7:15 pickup time. As we're walking along with this trail that is about 4 inches wide, we were at a point of no return. It was hard to think about going back for what we'd been through. We could see the swinging bridge ahead about 300 to 400 yards, but we were in a tight spot. As we would walk along these rock slides and rocks would fall, they would tumble down and off the cliff into the river. I was holding on to Stephanie's backpack part of the way, and she said later that didn't really help me. And I said, well, if you'd fallen, I was going to try to just hang on for dear life, and hopefully both of us would stop before we got to the river. We made it to a point right here where this leaning tree is. This was taken the day after we went back and looked at where we had been. Stephanie said, I've got to stop. I can't go any further. And I should have said that earlier for us, but anyway, we were able to work our way up to a tree a little bit above that leaning tree. There was a log there. The slope was still quite steep, but we were able to put our feet against that log and wait. We heard later, I called my brother-in-law and said, we need help. It's almost dark. We're stuck. He said, what do you want me to do? I said, well, whatever you do to call rescue. And we heard later that it was a miracle that the cell phones worked there. Fortunately, I had thrown in a couple of headlights just in case. I'd thrown in raincoats because it happened to start to rain. It first rained in 3 months there as we were waiting there on the hillside. So we waited and waited. It was really, looking back on it, a pretty precious time as we held onto each other and just trusted in those rescuers. Things that we had learned before, like the Psalm 23, we said that over and over. Songs that we sang together, it didn't matter whether people could hear us or not, but we were middle of nowhere. One of the happiest sights was these two headlights and several others behind it coming. The rescuers made it to us. Fortunately, we had the headlights. We were across the river from where they came, but they were able to see our headlights and move to us. First above us, but they were worried about rocks falling on us, so they moved around and came into the side. I sent a text to our sons, not to our two daughters, but our two sons, because I didn't want our daughters to worry, kind of just saying, pray for us. We're on this hillside. And my son Paul said, well, take some pictures. This was before it got dark, and we weren't really thinking much about taking pictures. So I want to give a shout out to the David Thompson Search and Rescue Association. And when they got to us, neat guys, local mountain guys, I couldn't believe what kind of terrain they scrambled over. They got us out going upwards. We'd actually missed the trail. It wasn't marked, but we missed it. And we went about 300 feet up. They went on to tell us, they said, good thing you guys stopped. It was a pretty touchy spot where you had gotten to. There's not uncommon that we rescue people from here, and it's not uncommon that people don't make it out of here with the rapids down below. Then they told us we said that we had hiked Lee Lake. We thought this was an easy trail. Lee Lake was harder. They said, oh yeah, Lee Lake, we pull people out of there every year. In fact, about once a year, we have a recovery there, which means someone's fallen and not lived. So we were thankful. This is not something in my sabbatical proposal that we were going to do, but was an amazing experience because of the lessons learned, because of, well, let me just read these lessons learned. Actually, the day after, I wrote down, what did I learn from this? Okay, some of these can apply to you guys, some of them may not. If it seems like a goat path, it probably is one. Don't hike an unknown trail just before dark, no matter if the trail map says it's easy. Don't have someone waiting for you at the other end at the time you expect to arrive, else your urgency may cloud your judgment. I was so wanted to be there. My brother-in-law was supposed to pick us up. I think that did cloud my judgment. Although your destination may be in sight, you may be on the wrong path. Better to wait than move ahead in blind faith or misguided hopes. Realize when you need to humble yourself and ask for help. And I say that, and I want to remember that, not just on a trail where you need rescue, but in any situation in life. Don't let obtaining your goal become more important than those you love. And let me just end the presentation with an encouragement that I learned, particularly from that experience there along the river. I encourage each of you guys out there to take time every day to appreciate your spouse, your partner, your family, your close friends, and let them know how much they mean to you. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. I think I'm tearing up a little bit. That was a very crazy story. Do we have any questions?
Ray, you said several times it was a training center. I don't know if I missed what kind of a training center it was. What did they train?
They work with an organization that trains missionaries going overseas. So it's a Christian organization that they work with.
Ray, did you do any planning for the 2023 Grassland Congress?
Yes, I did a whole lot of that, Jimmy. I showed you those few pictures, but worked closely with Tina and the AFGC with getting the final things to be able to put in papers, submit papers. Many of the logistics that are happening at that meeting. It's nice that we've got a good crew with Tina Bowling, who's the executive director of the American Forage and Grassland Council. She's handling a lot of logistics, and that's going to I mean, it's been helpful and it's going to be super helpful because we at the university can focus on things like the tours, like maybe helping review papers, like just actually getting people to come to the meeting and plan some of the sessions.
Roger Wilkins here. I don't know whether I can just make a comment
Yes, please, Roger.
from outside of the United States. Firstly, thanks very much, Ray, for that presentation and for all the work that you've been doing for International Grassland Congress over the first years. Ray travels around a bit, I know. He came over to European Grassland Federation in Ireland and was doing a tremendous promotional job, as he did indeed in Finland when we weren't both in Finland. What I'd like to do really is to say that, endorse what Ray said about the value that you can get, particularly young scientists can get from participating in international conferences like IGC. In my own case, my first involvement with IGC was in 1960 at Reading, and I was an undergraduate student at Reading at the time. And IGC had tremendous influence on my whole life because the conference was there in Reading at that time, and it's going to be Kentucky fairly soon. The quality of teaching that there was by the academic staff in the grassland area was very high because a lot of them are participating in this. But I saw your slide where you'd got a picture of proceedings, and it was reflected that I remembered buying a third copy with two other students of the proceedings of that International Grassland Congress. But seriously, a lot of the linkages that I've developed and really effective research collaborations during my career in grassland has been from contacts made at conferences like IGC. You meet people, you get to know them, whether you can work with them, exchanging ideas. And IGC, and in Europe, we've got the European Grassland Federation, can have a tremendous impact. So if you've got the opportunity for submitting material to a congress of this type, to participating in it, I'd certainly urge you to grab that opportunity in the same way that I think Gary has and Ray has and Vivian has and I had over the years. You might be writing a history 60 years later, you don't know. Thank you.
Roger, thank you so much, and for all your contributions to grasslands worldwide. Thank you, and for those comments too. And I'll be glad to share with people if they've got other questions. And then I'll be sharing more with people as we approach 2023 in the Grassland Congress here. I know many of you work in fields that relate to grasslands, anything from cover crops to native grasslands, etc. So look forward to getting many of you involved coming up to the next meeting, and let me know if you have any questions, if things are open up that you're able to go to Kenya.
That would be awesome. Any final comments? Well, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Thank you for sharing. I think we will be done for today, and we'll have our next seminar next Friday at the same time.
Very good. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Roger, thank you for joining in.